Welcome to Truck Tech. I'm Thomas Wasson. It is springtime, so it's time to ditch the official dour blue of the FreightWaves hoodie I've been issued and now move on to something more festive. And speaking of springtime and a lot of activity, the folks at Harbinger has been working really, really hard. They recently had a 100 truck milestone, and we have the privilege and pleasure to talk with their CEO and founder, John Harris, about not only this milestone, but what they've been cooking up. And John, I'm super excited to have you on. I know you're going to be at Act Expo coming up as well, but it's good to talk to you. Tell us what y'all have been up to lately.
Well, we've been, pretty much just head down, focused on making trucks. And thanks for having me on.
And it's an absolute pleasure. The 100 truck milestone is really cool. It's recently announced, and you're also starting your production program. Tell us a little bit about what that entails. I know for a lot of folks, we hear about deliveries, but full production is also a huge, huge deal, because I'm assuming that means production at scale, right?
That's right. Yeah, we wanted to build and then show it to people rather than sort of build one thing and then talk about how great it was. So we've been focused for the last couple of years on validating the product, but also validating the process. So today, here in Garden Grove at our factory, we're building trucks. We shipped 100 trucks in Q1, as you pointed out, but we're also building all the pieces around it. We're building battery systems. We're building electric motors. We're making transmissions. We're building suspension systems. So we've been focused on aligning that symphony of production and supply chain to make it operate smoothly at this scale.
And when we're talking about the potential when it's ramped up, dude, is there any future projections and what you envision once this thing gets fully juiced up? I mean, how many can you theoretically pump out?
So here at our first factory, I think that ceiling is around 5,000. Make it a little higher than that, but to be honest, it's hard to know right where the edge is until you get a bit closer. So there's room to take our capacity up by another multiple from where we are today.
And, talk a little bit about the EV sector as well. Right as you all are cooking up some really amazing products, there's talk about the political situation, incentives, how folks are going to pay for them. What are some of the conversations with customers that you all have been running into? Is it something where it's still full speed ahead, or is there existing incentives that folks may not know that they can get access to? What's kind of the state of the EVs at the moment from y'all's end?
So I think it's pretty broad. There's customers with different directions all over the place. The piece that I think surprises people the most is the incentive environment for EVs has not actually changed since last year. The discourse around it has changed. The general tone of what's going to be possible has changed. But if you look at what the incentives are that you can get today on EVs and what they were, let's arbitrarily say November 5th, it's exactly the same. Programs have not changed. Unfortunately, the customers are not necessarily aware of that because they're hearing so many different answers about what the incentives are and what they're going to be. And, maybe we'll outlaw electric vehicles or something. But the reality is none of that has actually come to pass. So the IRA tax credit, still in full effect. A lot of the state level incentives, still in full effect. CARB ACT, still in full effect. There's been very little as far as actual changes that have been executed since last year.
And I'm assuming for some of these incentives, they're already been funded legislatively, so the money's already been set aside to put in for it. And so I guess the confusion and the noise is like folks are afraid, is it take backsies rules, basically?
Right. And that's, the discourse coming out of policy environment in DC, I can understand why customers are asking those questions. But the reality is we have a fully implemented tax credit that's part of the IRS tax code for 2025. So can that be changed? I guess anything is possible, but we've never previously seen a change in the U.S. tax code that's retroactive. There's pretty strong cases to be made that you can't do that in the U.S. The idea that you could spend money and take advantage of a tax credit in April, and then the IRS would retroactively take it away from you in November, I don't think really aligns with how the U.S. operates. So I'm not going to say anything is impossible, but we're talking about settled IRS tax code that's in effect today.
And on March the 5th, you had recently launched the IRA guarantee to stabilize the pricing to help with this uncertainty. How does that work as well? Is that something where I would guaranteed, I'm assuming I write it off on my taxes with the current one, or is that where if I suddenly lose it, you guys step in? Tell us a little bit about what this release means for helping those customers who are getting bombarded with all of this information that, some of it is questionable on the status of EV regs.
Exactly. So we rolled that policy out to make this really straightforward for our customers. So we're prepared to make a bet that they're not going to retroactively change the tax code in the US, but that bet is for us to make, not really our customers. So the way that the program works is if you buy one of our trucks today, you make two payments. You make one payment immediately, and we've adjusted that payment to be at what we believe is now the actual parity price to a diesel truck in our class. And then if, which again to me is a very small if the IRA survives until the end of the year, you make the second payment in January. And that second payment is fairly small. It's between $10,000 and $20,000. But we've basically taken the remaining premium that our trucks have at point of acquisition over the equivalent diesel trucks, and we've pushed it out to January. So the customers can get to January and say, okay, it's the end of 2025. The tax code hasn't changed. Now we know we're going to get that tax credit for sure. And then we'll pay Harbinger that second payment.
And that's really cool because when I'm looking at that IRA value credit, it says $40,000 per EV as an incentives. And so, like you said, I guess for this tax year, you can't just retroactively pull it if it's already in the tax code. The big question is at the end of this year, are they going to mess with the tax code for next year, right?
Correct. And I think that's a less crazy direction to wonder about, right? There's a lot of administration priorities right now. Some of them seem genuinely pretty important. We assume that they're going to focus on those things, and then maybe they'll come back around in Q4, for example, and amend the tax law for 2026. That's possible, but we want to make it clear to our customers that 2025, these rules are fully baked. They're not going away. And so we're guaranteeing it this year.
And talking about the state of the medium duty market, I mean, it looks like there's a lot of opportunities, especially in the EV space. Since we've last caught up and stuff, tell us, has there been any specific cool in terms of product innovations, or you're scaling up to get the production lines? Is it something where the medium duty space, we have a video of an awesome looking RV. Tell us a little bit more about that, what y'all have been cooking up.
So I think since we last connected, our focus has primarily been on just building product maturity. One of the ways we've been doing that is with our early partner, Thor, who is, of course, their own upfitter. And so here you can see in that video, one of the vehicles that they built around a Harbinger platform. So we've been working with them to test that vehicle, but we've also been testing our commercial vehicles all over the world. You might have seen some of the content we put up showing our vehicles in New Zealand, for example, this past summer, where we sent 3 walk-in vans up to a glacier to do ABS and stability testing in the winter in June.
Oh, that's cool. And when you're looking at it as well, one of the interesting things with EVs is like the powertrain. Is that something where, especially with y'all's, are you doing kind of like a modified powertrain, or is each wheel kind of their inner little powertrain? For the drivability and scalability aspect, is there kind of a specific design that works best for this medium duty space?
We think there is. So when you think about a medium duty truck, one of the surprising things is you don't want a 50-50 weight distribution. That's in automotive in general, that's been a target, right? If we can have a perfectly balanced weight distribution, the vehicle will handle well and it'll be more stable. That doesn't work when you put 10,000 pounds in the back of the vehicle. So we use a rear wheel drive architecture so that we've got that drive axle under all the cargo. We use a pretty unique implementation there, built here at Harbinger. So we use a single drive unit integrated into a Dedean beam axle. So we take the electric motor, the transmission, the differential, cooling system, we wrap all those together into a single unit, and then we chassis mount it so that it's sprung, so that reduces unsprung mass, which again helps the vehicle handle, but it also protects that unit from shock and vibe. because it's now being protected by the vehicle's suspension system. And then we use a one-piece dead axle plus articulating half shafts. So that allows us to make a vehicle that handles a little bit more dynamically. That axle can articulate independently of the rest of the chassis as we drive through, potholes and maybe over curbs on occasion. But it just helps us make a vehicle that it feels more grounded and that is more responsive for those drivers.
And they're really fun because you're used to like a transmission and things that are shifting. Is that something where EVs also kind of shift into different gears, or is it where it's been explained to me like regenerative braking golf cart rules, where it just goes and then it regenerates and starts charging itself? For folks who are interested in getting it, what's kind of the drivability aspect of it compared to a lot of these diesel medium duties?
Yeah, so our vehicles don't shift. It's just a single speed. So you punch that accelerator pedal, you're going to go from 0 up to 70, and the vehicle's never going to have an interruption to shift. That's because we can support that big speed range with instantaneous torque of an electric motor. So normally you have a transmission in a combustion vehicle because you have a fairly narrow power band. And if you tried to run the whole vehicle, in first gear, the drivability would be bad and it wouldn't support a highway speed. And if you tried to run the whole vehicle in fifth gear, you'd have no torque to get up a hill. With an electric motor, we don't have that issue. So the Harbinger drivetrain produces about 440 horsepower, but it also produces about 13,000 foot-pounds of torque at the rear wheel. So we've got plenty of torque to cover that whole range without having to slow the vehicle down to shift.
That's a lot of juice. And one of the things I'm curious is for making these EVs, if you have that much torque and juice, do you have to put like limiters on it? Because let's say I just gun this thing. Is it going to fry my tires? I have a follow-on question because I talked to a tire bro about tires, but is that one of the big things when you're developing these things that people don't really expect, which is I need to make sure now with all this torque and this adjustment that I don't overdo it and then I'm having to buy like a new set of tires because I kind of blew them up.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. We don't really want to let the operators peel the tires off every time they pull out of the depot. The fleet managers find that particularly unhelpful, is what we've learned. So one of the things that we did differently here is we control the throttle pedal mapping in a pretty unusual way. Now, besides building the motors and the chassis and the batteries, Harbinger also writes all of the application layer software here with our in-house team. And so it gives us the flexibility to change things like that. So when you push down on the throttle pedal in a combustion vehicle, that throttle pedal is mapped directly to the amount of power that engine's going to produce, right? You're basically adding fuel. And if the vehicle is empty or full, the engine doesn't know, the pedal doesn't know, and that's why the vehicle will in a combustion vehicle, you'll have a much faster response if the vehicle's empty. And with the amount of torque we have on these vehicles, we don't want to do that, right? Otherwise, when the vehicle is empty, you're just going to be beating those tires to death. And so when you push down on what I'll call the accelerator pedal instead of the throttle pedal, when you push down on that accelerator pedal, you're not actually ramping that power level up, you're ramping the acceleration level up. So the vehicle is measuring the acceleration and it's adding more torque until we hit the acceleration that we defined. So if the vehicle's empty, we're only going to give you about a third of the power because you're still going to hit that speed really quickly. If the vehicle is full, we're going to give you more power so that you can hit that acceleration target. But the idea was to make the vehicle drive about the same way when it was full and empty.
That's cool. So theoretically, you could like, if a customer special ordered it and they wanted more torque at the expense of their tire budget, you can adjust it. But it's not like a traditional engine where I give it all, it puts all the fuel in it. It's more of the ramp up action because if you did hit it all at once, just kablooey.
Exactly. Yeah, we don't really want to give it all at the same time if that's avoidable.
And I think that's really cool because requiring different tires. I spoke with a guy, his company was Rudata. They do tire telematics. And they said that interestingly, the EVs, the tire types and manufacturers, some tires are good for EVs, some aren't. Is that something where you get like firsthand experience helping other OEMs and stuff by collecting this data and saying, look, maybe I need some thicker walls on these tires based on this different drivetrain? Is that one of those cool questions you get to look at as well is kind of some of these partnerships and opportunities, or the current tire is pretty much good enough as long as I don't, try to hack it and get 13,000 pounds of torque.
Yeah, I think the answer is a little bit of both. There are things that we want in an EV tire that are different. That doesn't mean the existing tires won't work, but it means that if we are really optimizing the tire for an electric vehicle application, there's things we're going to want to do differently. In passenger cars, that's become quite common. Anytime you launch a new high volume passenger car, you can expect that's going to come with a new tire. So I'm sure the tires on the Model 3 and the Model Y, those are all tires that Tesla and some tire partner developed around that application. That hasn't happened yet in trucking. The tire manufacturers making tires for trucking have a little bit less experience in customizing the tires for the application. We're talking to a lot of those companies, and I think we're going to see more of that in the next 2 years. But ideally, what we want is a narrower tire. We want it to have a higher load index. We want it to be a bit harder. But the idea is we want to keep pulling back that rolling resistance as much as we can. Now, that's something you want in an ICE vehicle as well. And so there's a constant march forward of lower and lower rolling resistance on tires. The difference is with an EV, it makes a much bigger difference because most of the energy you consume in a kind of neighborhood delivery route is actually going into that rolling resistance from tires. So if you can change it, you've got a much bigger payback.
And do y'all use regenerative braking as well on the EVs?
We do.
Okay.
We use an implementation.
How does it work? Because I've seen a few. I got to drive one. I've finally seen the line. Somebody put me on a test track, so I'm learning a little bit about it. But when we're looking at the regenerative one, is it one where you just have different scales and you adjust it based on the amount you want it to regen, or if folks looking to switch, describe it a little bit to them, because I think it's such a cool concept that you don't really have to use your brakes if you have it adjusted a certain way.
Yeah, so we've tried to strike a good balance there. I think there's kind of two extremes that we usually see in regen braking. There's regen, but it's so gentle, it's not really saving you that much energy. And then there's what people call single pedal driving, where you really never need to touch the brakes. And if you get used to that, you can get the maximum amount of energy savings that way. But it is a big change. So we've seen if you go to full blown single pedal driving, where the vehicle basically applies the brakes on its own as soon as you take your foot off the throttle, people tend to not love that. I think especially the fleet drivers that have more driving expertise and they want more control. So with our vehicle, when you take your foot off the throttle, it will start to slowly apply a little brake. It won't be a ton, but that vehicle will coast to a stop sooner than it would in a combustion vehicle. And what we're doing there is we're using the electric motor as an engine brake to just recapture that energy and send it back into the battery system as the vehicle slows down.
So is that like an alternator, right? You turn the little motors into an alternator?
Basically, yeah. If you're not putting electricity into that motor, but you're still spinning it, the electricity is going to go out in the opposite direction instead. So we capture that, send it back into the brake system. And send it back into the battery system.
That is cool. And we're looking at range. I mean, I'm assuming I can so if I'm utilizing regenerative strategies, I've got my medium duty fleet of EVs. I mean, can I get like 20 extra miles in a day, or how big are the capabilities right now for folks who are unfamiliar with it and, trying to maybe change their operations to take advantage of this while they're adopting these trucks?
20 miles a day, definitely. I would say you can do a lot more than that depending on the type of route you're driving. So this is obvious, but the key with regen braking is you've got to use the brakes at least a little bit. So if you get in that vehicle and you just drive 4 hours down the highway at 65 miles an hour, you're going to tap the brakes a little bit, in traffic, but there's not that much energy to be captured. So if you're talking sort of straight highway routes, it's not going to make that much of a difference. Of course, people aren't typically driving last mile delivery trucks for 4 hours down the highway without stopping them. So luckily, that's not a very common use case. If you're looking at a traditional last mile use case where the driver is going to get in the vehicle, drive 100 feet to the next house and stop again, you're going to capture a massive amount of energy through that regen, both because you're stopping a lot, but also because you're never really getting up to highway speeds. So you're not having to put that much energy in before you take it back out with the brake system. So in that pure neighborhood type delivery application, you can capture 30, 40% or more of the energy back through the brake system.
And I had a question on the type of battery. From it's been explained to me that there's different types of battery packs. Tesla's use some that I've been told may be very explodey, but they're also very high in the juice. Other OEMs have told me they've used various types of capabilities that, while they're heavier, they're a little more stable. Is there something in terms of the battery chemistry that, when you're thinking of making these all in house, is there a special kind of secret sauce, or is it something where I guess it's personal preference and risk reward?
So we look at two main things in that decision. How much is the battery going to weigh? And what country are we going to have to get the input materials from? So those chemistries that you're alluding to there, they're nickel-rich chemistries. So nickel, cobalt, aluminum, or nickel, manganese, cobalt. So these are the nickel family of batteries. They're really high energy density. You referred to batteries being explodey, which I appreciate. I will say that that's not really about the chemistry. That's just about quality of manufacturing. And keep in mind that the battery in your iPhone and the battery in your very explodey hoverboard, they're using the same chemistry. And obviously, if we had as many iPhones blowing up as we did hoverboards 3 years ago, that would have been a big problem. So if you make the battery the right way with good quality assurance and the right cell partner, it doesn't really need to be explodey. It just has to be built safely. So we've got that nickel family of batteries. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, that's why I was curious about the nickel family of batteries, because if you adjust it, then it becomes a little more stable at the expense of the weight.
No, it's not at the
Oh,
expense of
really?
the weight. It's just at the expense of making an effort and having high quality manufacturing. So that, like that iPhone battery and that hoverboard battery, the iPhone battery is not heavier. It has even more energy density than that hoverboard battery. The difference is that Apple pays a lot of attention to making super high quality products in factories that they oversee, and that hoverboard that you might get on Black Friday for $99 doesn't quite have an Apple level of quality assurance. But it isn't really about making it heavier.
And I had a final few questions here. We got a little bit of time, and I really appreciate you letting me pick your brain on this. I think a lot of the EV reporting has been, here's some of the capabilities, but diving deep into the actual nuts and bolts of how it works is really, really helpful for folks to understand, because it is it's kind of a paradigm shift in how you're driving. When we're looking at making the batteries, you all make a lot of stuff in-house. I'm assuming there's a great opportunity to make them all in the U.S. from start to finish, or is there still supply chains folks need to be aware of, large countries, manufacturers, when we're looking at sourcing the best batteries or picking a vendor who does a good work with those batteries?
So you can do a lot of it in the U.S. Harbinger does almost all of it in the U.S. You can't quite do everything today unless you're Tesla and you have access to that battery cell production that's happening in Reno. I can tell you we're moving that way quick, but today the majority of Harbinger's battery activity does happen here, including the complete assembly of the battery module and the battery pack. And that's the other important piece related to your last question around what chemistry. We use nickel-rich chemistries because by doing so, we don't have to buy cells in China. And we know that that's a huge geopolitical risk. It's a huge cost risk for our companies or for our customers. So by choosing to go with that nickel-rich route, besides building lighter weight vehicles, we also are able to build vehicles that do not use cells coming out of China.
That was the big question I was curious about. I tried telling people, and this was from our earlier conversation, a majority of like battery stuff, a lot of it is made in China or by Chinese firms with multinationals splattered in between. But I was thinking like, man, it's almost like farm to fresh. Do you know where your battery is coming from?
That's right. And unfortunately, it's a simple answer. If you're using a lithium iron phosphate battery, that cell was made in China. I don't have to know what brand it came from or anything else to answer that question.
Well, I'm all about the humane use of good quality nickel batteries, so we're going to spread the word. But I really do appreciate your time, John. Thank you so much for hopping on and giving us a rundown. If folks want to learn more about Harbinger and check out what you've been working on, or even place orders, what's the best way to get more info?
So harbingermotors.com, our website, as well as our social channels on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, everywhere good content is made.
Perfect. Thanks so much, John. Are you going to be at ACT Expo? ACT or is it ACT? I always get them mixed up.
I usually call it ACT, but I think I'm an outlier. Yeah, we'll be there. We'll have a big show presence, and we're going to be announcing a pretty exciting new product at the end of the month there. So we'd love to see you.
I'll look for you, sir. Thanks again, as always. We'll catch up again soon, and we'll check out what you're cooking up.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
That's going to be a wrap for this show, but if you're just joining us, we are on Apple, YouTube, and Spotify, wherever you can find your podcast. While you're at it, sign up for the Truck Tech newsletter. I always get them mixed up here. It goes out Fridays at 11 a.m. FreightWaves.com/trucktech. I also post up articles, so you can check it out, and I'll backlink them in the newsletter in case you miss it. That's a wrap for this episode. Coming up in the coming weeks, I will be at ACT Expo and having a lot of wonderful stuff. And while you're at it, we have a FreightWaves Freight Fraud Symposium on May 14th. You do not want to miss that. Sign up for it in Dallas, Texas. I won't be there, but you'll meet people much smarter than I am and learn about fraud. Check it out. That's a wrap for this episode. We'll see you again next week.